So where is the Water Street Inn? Recently I've been seeing Facebook posts showing old photos of the Water Street Inn. I've passed through this area many times since I was a kid. We used to come up to the Water Street Flea Market to shop. Since I lived in Altoona at that time and had family in Harrisburg, we were constantly going through this valley. But I do not remember ever seeing that inn anywhere along here. There was an older house down here. I was actually arguing with a family member that that might possibly be the old Water Street Inn, but if you compare structures, it doesn't really line up. So the question is, where was the Water Street Inn? After researching the Water Street Inn, I realized that it was actually a hub for the Pennsylvania frontier at one time, the Pennsylvania Canal. There's links to the Revolutionary War and the William Penn Highway that was eventually installed in here after the invention of the automobile.
By high, steep hills all round.
This place has like a moat or something going around it over the years and actually correlates to the newspaper. There it is, old walls from the canal. So some of my earliest memories here in Water Street was shopping at the Water Street Flea Market. I'm not sure if it's still a flea market, but in 1982, Rambo First Blood just came out.
Why would you be carrying a knife like this?
Hunting.
There used to be a guy that set up a table with knives in here, and we used to buy those old survival knives here so that we could run off into the wilderness and survive like Rambo. Unfortunately, the minute we went to cut something with one of those knives, it would break, but we'd often return back to the Water Street Flea Market here to get another knife. So we passed through here a lot, but I don't remember ever seeing that Water Street Inn anywhere around here. So the first place I looked was Penn Pilot to see if there are any old photos of structures in this area that no longer exist. So this place has like a moat or something going around it, some type of water channel that I think had something to do with drainage here, because this was a huge floodplain at one point, and there's old articles showing this place flooding out and damage to the Water Street Inn. But after comparing photos that I took of this place and the Water Street Inn photos, you can see that they're not even close as far as windows and things like that. After I started looking at those Penn Pilot photos, you can see there was a huge structure right on the other side here. That structure changed over the years and actually correlates to the newspaper articles showing renovations made to the Water Street Inn. This road right here would have been the old road around to continue on 453 here. Water Street can be traced back to the early 1700s when Edward Beatty and his family settled this area. The earliest known record of Water Street was when Conrad Weiser mentioned it in his log in 1748. But a few years later, 1754, John Harris of Harrisburg would mention it when he was talking about the route from his ferry to the Allegheny River. There are stories of the Beatty family living here around that time and trading with Indians. In one incident, they said the Indians came to their house, which was somewhere in this area, and they gave them some buttermilk, and in return the Indians actually brought back ham and some venison to them a couple weeks later and hung it on their fence. Edward Beatty had several sons, and they were said to be very powerful and strong individuals, and they were completely unafraid of any of the Indians in this area. They were said to not care about the Indians any more than they would care about a bear. And it was said that the Indians actually feared these boys. So the start of the Revolutionary War, this was still the frontier of Pennsylvania. A few years later, in 1778, the same time as the Big Runaway, a fort was built just west of here. As the Beattys aged, the sons were said to have moved to Tennessee and Kentucky, so they started selling off the property. Just west of here, some of this land was sold to the Dean family, the Lowrys, and the Simontons. Captain Simonton was well known in this area, and just after the start of the Revolutionary War, a few years later in 1778, Fort Lowry was built just west of here on that property. Captain Simonton was assigned to run that fort. Now, Mr. Dean did not get along with Lowry, so when he was told that the Indians were getting ready to attack, and this is 1778, so the same year as the Big Runaway, he decided to keep his family on his farm just south of that fort and not go up there to safety. In the fall of 1778, he took a couple of his sons and his daughter off the field to work, and he left his wife, his daughter, and another son back at the house. When he returned, he found that his wife was massacred, his daughter was scalped, and his son was missing. In 1796, Mr. Beatty himself died and passed his property off to his son, who then opened a tavern believed to be here at this location. In 1802, the Beatty son then sold this land and his tavern to Thomas Provines of Alexandria, who was already operating a tavern down there. In 1809, the tavern was then sold to Louis Mittinger. The War of 1812 broke out, and Captain Simonton's sons were serving with the military up in New York when they came across a band of Seneca Indians. One of the Seneca Indians was with a bride, and he looked like a white man. So they approached him and asked him if he was from Juniata. The man then said, "Yeah, I think so."
Some of the men in the American army saw a white man among the Indians, married to a squaw, who had horses, cattle, and lived in a good house. They asked him what his name was, and he told them, "John Sims." "Are you from the Juniata?" "I think I am," he said. Upon being asked whether he would like to see his brothers who were with the soldiers, he said he would, and burst into tears, leaving little doubt that he was the lost Simonton boy.
But the brothers reported that he then walked off with his bride with the tribe and was never seen from again. Unfortunately, by the time those brothers returned home from the War of 1812, their father, Captain Simonton, was already dead. By 1828, they were already planning to join eastern Pennsylvania to the west through a canal system. By 1831, the canal was completed through Huntington, and the canal boat James Clark was launched from there. By 1835, Water Street was a main hub for the U.S. mail. This is where the old canal would have came through here. Just to think about it, Charles Dickens came through here. In 1842, Mr. Mittinger then built a new inn at that location, which was also the same year that Charles Dickens came through here on his Notes on America tour. He actually wrote about coming through this valley on a canal boat from Harrisburg to Pittsburgh.
Sometimes at night the way wound through some lonely gorge, like a mountain pass in Scotland, shining and coldly glittering in the light of the moon, and so closed in by high steep hills all round that there seemed to be no egress save through the narrower path by which we had come, until one rugged hillside seemed to open, and shutting out the moonlight as we passed into its gloomy throat, wrapped our new course in shade and darkness.
In 1850, the Petersburg branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad was completed and canal traffic began to decline in this area. It began to get real slow in Water Street. By 1875, the canal was shut down and the tavern fell into disrepair. It was eventually sold to Reverend Samuel Reed, who opened up as a boarding school for girls. By 1898, it was once again a tavern, and by 1908, the Ford Model T was introduced, making the first mass-produced affordable automobile. But in 1916, the Water Street Inn burned down. Unfortunately, that was the same year that the William Penn Highway was dedicated and ran through this area. It was eventually repaired and opened back up, but in 1921 it burned again. 1922, it was rebuilt, and the porches you see and the structures you can see in the aerial photographs were added to this inn. So they had big ideas to make this into a huge stopping point for the William Penn Highway. So while I was researching this video, I found this newspaper article the same year of the renovations on the Water Street Inn in 1923. It says big race course opens Labor Day. It says a gigantic structure will be completed by that time. It discusses the Altoona Speedway. I had no idea there even was an Altoona Speedway, so I started to look into that. I ended up finding the location where that speedway was located. But by 1974, it must have turned into a rough place because there's articles showing state troopers being injured trying to take people into arrest at this place. In 1979, there were newspaper articles asking if something could be done with the Water Street Inn. So the inn must have been there when we were coming through to go to the Water Street Flea Market right across the street. Unfortunately, in the 1990s, it was torn down, but this is exactly where the inn would have been located. It looks like it's some sort of retention pond at this point, so there's probably no structures that we'd be able to see, but that is the location of the Water Street Inn. I'm standing on what was previously the Altoona Speedway. In 1923, this was a wooden track speedway here. I'm gonna try to put the drone up here in a second so you can see it. It's now an industrial park. But after it was a speedway, they put an airport in right next to it. We're actually standing on one of the runways of that airport. After that airport closed, this was later turned into a drag strip. My dad actually remembers coming to drag races here on this drag strip.